Hey everybody, it's Grandmaster Ben Feingold here with another Great Player of the Past lecture. We'd like to thank our usual donor. The name is anonymous. It's funny because a lot of our donors are different people, but they have the same name, anonymous. Sort of like, one of our viewers today is Alston, and that's actually one of Karen's nephews is Alston. So there you go. So everybody has the same name. And tonight's lecture, requested by the sponsor, is on former U.S. champion Patrick Wolff. In fact, he won the U.S. championship twice, 1992 and 1995. Now, most of my lectures, I show exactly 3 games. And then I yutz it up a little bit for the first 10, 15 minutes. This lecture is going to be a little different. So either you're going to like this lecture a lot, or you're going to hate this lecture a lot. There's no in between. There's no like, that lecture is okay. And the reason is, I'm a personal friend of Patrick Wolff, so I wanted to spend most of the lecture actually talking about him as a person, and also talking about things, stories that maybe he doesn't want me to talk about. And also talk about his playing style, which with other people that I've lectured on, I didn't really know them, some of them, especially players of the past. Since most of the great players of the past are no longer living, Patrick Wolff is still living. And in fact, Patrick Wolff is a year or 2 older than me. And we grew up together in American chess, so I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Of course, the main reason he doesn't play chess anymore is he went into the financial industry and made money there. So as you all know, we can call him the Wolff of Wall Street. I hope I can keep lecturing because of all the laughing that's going on. And in fact, Patrick Wolff had a hedge fund that he was running. He was the manager of the fund. I think it was Clarion or Clariton or Claretian or something. And it was founded by Peter Thiel, who's a famous person in his own right, and also about 2,300 at chess. And then Patrick wanted to start his own hedge fund, so Peter Thiel financed that. And then that hedge fund, as far as I know, either no longer exists or Patrick's doing something else in the financial world. But the first time I remember meeting Patrick, and I probably met him before, I just don't remember, was in 1984 in Ojai, California. And that was at the U.S. Junior Championship. That was my first of 5 U.S. Junior Championships. I was 14 years old, and I believe Wolff was 16. Although I did turn 15 the month after the tournament, but it was my first time playing. And the reason I got in wasn't because I was high rated. The reason I got in was the local organizers wanted to get someone from California in the tournament because the tournament was in California. So the only way to do that was, instead of having 8, 10, or 12 players, which was typical, was to have 14 players. So because they had a 14-player round robin, which the USCF said fine, so a California person got in, then I got to get in, because my rating was, 2240, something like that. Maybe it's 2280, I don't know. It was over 2200. But, okay, nowadays, if you want to play in the U.S. Junior Championship, you better be 2550 USCF or higher. And even then, you might not get in. People are better now. Also, the ratings are a bit inflated now, but not that much. So that was my first U.S. Junior Championship. And the reason I bring it up isn't just because I met Patrick there, unless we met before and I forgot, which is also possible. But it's because he won the tournament. And that particular event, the highest rated player was Max DeLugie. He was actually 100 points higher than number 2, which was Patrick. And after 4 rounds, DeLugie had half a point. He had 1 draw and 3 losses, sort of like Magnus today against Dubov. And so he wasn't in contention. I had 5 out of, I had 6 out of 11, and then I had 6 out of 12, and then I had 6 out of 13. I lost my last 2 rounds. But anyway, I had a good time. I was one of the younger players. And that's actually where I met Doug Eckert, who you know from St. Louis. He beat me in that tournament. He was actually having a good tournament. I think he tied for third. I think he was 19 or 20 at that point. Doug Eckert's much older than me. So I played in 5 U.S. Junior Championships, and I think Patrick played in 4 of them. And I think the last one that I played in, he was already too old. Now, Patrick Wolff in some ways reminds me of Stuart Rachels, and we have to just hope that Stuart Rachels never watches this video, because if he hears that Patrick Wolff reminds me of him, he's not going to like that. But Stuart Rachels is another former U.S. champion that you may or may not have heard of, who quit chess, and he did it because he became a philosophy professor, and his dad was a philosophy professor. Stuart's dad, James Rachels, was actually a pretty famous philosophy professor, and Patrick Wolff's father is also a philosophy professor. I think his mother was also a professor, and I didn't realize this. I thought I knew Patrick pretty well, but I guess you don't know anybody as well as you think you do. Patrick's brother is a law professor, and Patrick's brother was in the Obama administration. And not only that, when I said his name to Karen, Karen said, I heard of him. So, all right, I guess Patrick Wolff's brother is more famous than he is. Now, when I lived in Belgium, I was still playing for America, and I lived in Belgium from 88 to 92. And in 1988, the U.S. Junior Championship was held in Amherst, Massachusetts, and Patrick Wolff's father teaches at Amherst. He's a professor, and they used to live in Boston, and his parents divorced, so his mom lived in Boston and his dad lived in Amherst. And I flew in from Belgium to play in the U.S. Junior Championship, which is sort of odd, but I was living in Belgium. And I got to Patrick Wolff's mom's house, and I stayed there, I think, one night. And then I took a bus to Amherst, and then I stayed there for one night at his dad's, and then I somehow stayed in the dorm. It was at the Amherst dorms. But anyway, in that event, Patrick Wolff and I tied for second, and I think Stuart Rachels won, I think. And we had a blitz playoff for second place, and eventually I lost the playoff. I think it was 2-2, and then I lost the last 2 games, sort of like in the junior in '84. Patrick Wolff is one of the few people who went to Yale and Harvard. In fact, his parents were professors at Harvard and went to Harvard, and his brother graduated Harvard. And Patrick went to Yale, left Yale at some point, and then he went to Harvard and graduated from Harvard. So obviously a well-educated family and so forth, mainly and so forth. Now, a story that I completely forgot about until right now, although I have told this story before, but I just remembered it. When I lived in Ann Arbor, which I did for many years, Ann Arbor, Michigan, I had a student, and he was maybe 11 years old, 10 years old, something like that, 10 or 11. He was about 900 strength, maybe. Maybe I'm being nice. Anyway, I would go to his house. He lived about 3 miles from me, and give him chess lessons like once a week. And his parents were both law professors. And his dad was actually a clerk on the Israeli Supreme Court, and he was a professor at Michigan, and they stopped getting lessons when they moved to Chicago because he got a job at Chicago, and he actually got Barack Obama's old office when he was his dad. And his mom was a law professor. That's how his parents met. But she retired, and she was basically a mom to like 2 or 3 kids. At some point, I told my student about his mom being a law professor and got a degree in law, and he's like, what? And he says, Mom, you graduated law school? And she's like, yeah. And he says, you did? Okay. After I gave the kid lessons for about 6 months, his mom came up to me and said, you know, I used to date a guy when I was in law school at Harvard who told me he was a good chess player. Now, I've heard this story before. You know, somebody's a good chess player, but they can barely play chess. And I said, what's his name? And she said, Patrick Wolff. And I said, he is a good chess player. He was the U.S. champion. So that was a strange happenstance or coincidence. I don't know. I talked to Alanis Morissette about that, and she said it was ironic because she doesn't know what irony is. Okay, but anyway, she's not the one. I mean, she's Canadian, so maybe irony in Canada is the reverse. So the first time I went abroad was in 1986, and I've shown on my stream several times, I actually have a plate from this tournament in Oakham, England, and it was at a private school that's like several hundred years old. It was like the 400th or the 450th anniversary. And when I say it was my first time abroad, it's my first time abroad to go to a chess tournament. I actually went to Moscow in '84 for a chess seminar, but that wasn't a chess tournament, that was something else. So we arranged, I would fly from Detroit to, I think it was New York, then New York to London. And when I got to New York, I would get on a plane and Patrick Wolff would get on the plane next to me. We had seats next to each other. I was 16 years old. He was 17 or 18. And he knew England really well. He'd been there before. He knew how to get to the tournament. He knew the train schedule. He knew everything. So once we get to London, he'll get us to the tournament somehow. So I'm like, all right. So I get to New York. I'm on the plane. Everybody's on the plane. The seat next to me is empty. And I'm like, well, where's Patrick? If Patrick doesn't get on the plane, I'm going to land in London and be like, all right, now what? I had nothing. And then the plane's like about to leave, and the flight attendant says, do you know a Patrick Wolff? And I'm like, yeah. Says, he's coming. His flight was late. And he like ran on the plane, and the plane took off. So and we got to the tournament easily in London. He did know how to do stuff and get to the tournament in Oakham. Oakham is in the north of England. It's pretty far from London, but he knew how to do everything. So anyway, when we came back, we stayed in London overnight, and we had to catch the plane back to the US in the morning. And Patrick said, I know the subway system in London, the tube, and I know the timing, and I know everything. So of course, he was late to breakfast. He's like, that doesn't matter. And then we got on the wrong subway, and then he said, oh wait, this is wrong. So we got on another one. Then we got on a train to go to Gatwick, the airport in London, and the train broke down. And we were sitting there for like half an hour, and we got off the train onto another train, like on the ground. It was weird. Then when we got to the airport, our flight had already left. So that's my experience with Patrick. Is I was scared going there, and I was scared coming back. And we actually got another plane like immediately. It wasn't a big deal, but we basically missed the plane because of Patrick. Patrick was not only a good chess player, and I'm going to talk about that before we look at his game, but he was also a great coach. When Patrick was ending his career in his 20s, he became the coach for Vishy Anand. And Anand was winning all kinds of candidates matches and tournaments with Patrick by his side. So we gave him the very mean nicknames. I mean, we were teenagers and in our 20s. What do you want from us? Some of us called him Patricia, and most people called him Mrs. Anand because he was always with Anand. And Anand was doing really well with Patrick as his coach because Patrick was very detail-oriented and very, basically the opposite of me. I'm just like, okay, that move's legal, then I play it. And Patrick wants to know everything about everything. So when Anand is playing, Anand's really well prepared, and Patrick's really well prepared, and they were a really good team. They became friends early on in their lives, and I don't know if they met in '86. That's where I met Anand when we went to England, but maybe that's where Patrick met him also. And in fact, I became very good friends with Anand, and when I lived in Belgium in 1988, Anand stayed with us for a week. He was getting visas to all the various countries. So, the junior players meet each other on the tour and so forth. I've played Patrick several times. I remember losing to him in the World Chess Festival in Canada in '88. I got totally crushed. For some reason, we're not going to look at that game. We've drawn several times, and my brain tells me I lost another game to him, but I got nothing. So it's possible I only lost to him once, and it's also possible I lost to him more than once, but I have no idea anything about the other games. I just remember draws. Okay, but Patrick was always a lot better than me. He was always between 100 and 220 FIDE points higher rated than me. His USCF was always higher than mine. And like a lot of people from my generation who played in the US Junior Championships every year, we were the top kids in the country. Almost all of them quit chess. They got real jobs, and I'm the only one who didn't do that. I just do chess stuff. And Alex Fishbein, if you've heard of him, he actually does both. Alex Fishbein was always playing chess, and he's always working. He has a family. He has a 9-to-5 job. He works in New York, I think also in finance, and he just does both. Everybody else quit chess, but they're all grandmasters. Ilya Gurevich, Alex Scherzer, Patrick Wolff. Obviously, Stuart Rachel should be a grandmaster. He's never got his last norm. Vivek Rao was a good player who also quit chess. He was 2,500. Danny Edelman was an IM 2,500. He quit chess. Everybody my age quit chess, and they got real jobs. And that was before the St. Louis Chess Club and the internet, where there's so much money in chess now. I think a lot of those people wouldn't have quit if they could make 6 figures doing chess stuff, but instead they made 6 figures doing normal stuff. That's a problem that America had for a long time, is people who were very good at chess in their teens, once they got to college or graduate school or that age, chess was over. And Patrick is one of these people. Now, Patrick is a very energetic player. Patrick plays for the win with white and black. Patrick plays tons of theory, and he knows tons of theory, and he studied a lot. He had every chess book. He studied them all. He had novelties ready in every opening, and he really knew what he was doing, and he always played the most aggressive way. He played for a win against everybody, and that's basically what everybody should do. And a lot of people today don't do that. They play scared, okay? And obviously, people who play that way, like Daniel Dubov, those are fan favorites, right? Now, Radjabov, who also did well today, he drew 14 games in a row in this rapid tournament. That's not what everybody wants to see, but it turned out well for him this particular tournament. There's only one game that I thought of that I had to show you that Patrick played. It's one of his most famous games, maybe his most famous, even though he won 2 US championships. In 1980, was it 88? I think it was 88. In 1988, go away, thank you. There was a clock simul given by Garry Kasparov. Now, I know the typical chess player thinks Magnus is the greatest player who ever lived, and they can't stop talking about Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen's great, everybody else is terrible. All right, fine. And I do have Magnus in my top 6, but that makes me a hater because I don't have him number 1. So, sorry. Anyway, one of the greatest players that ever lived, either 1, 2, or 3, is Garry Kasparov, okay? And Kasparov was so good that, like Magnus, not only did he win every tournament, but unlike Magnus, Kasparov would win almost all of his games. When Magnus wins a tournament, he wins by half a point, or he doesn't win. And when Kasparov wins a tournament, it's by 4 points. Okay, it's just who comes in second place. It's not competitive. And Kasparov was so good, and he was winning by so many points, that what he started to do was play simuls against Olympic teams. So he would say, Germany, I'm going to play your Olympic team, but I'm going to give them a clock simul. And then he did this with a lot of countries. Okay, and he always won. So he'd play 4 games or 6 games at once against the 4 or the 6 best players in the country, and he would win. He'd win like 4-2 or 4.5, 1.5 or whatever. And in 1988, he gave a clock simul against American junior players that I was invited to, and I decided not to play. I don't really regret that decision. I didn't want to travel a lot to play one clock simul game. I just didn't care that much. And so it was basically the best American junior players like Patrick Wolff and Stuart Rachels and Danny Edelman and Alex Fishbein and so forth, mainly and so forth. And so I have to get rid of the chat. All right. Okay. And then there was a scandal at the event. So it's a good thing I wasn't there. Or maybe if I was there, Edelman wouldn't have played and there wouldn't have been a scandal. Well, I guess scandal's good. Anyway, Danny Edelman, in his game with Kasparov, they played the Sveshnikov and they played a variation where you repeat moves. It's like queen and bishop. The queen and bishop sort of move back and forth, attacking each other. And then Edelman claimed a draw, and the game was only like 12 moves long. And then Kasparov's like, you have a chance to play with a world champion and you play a 12-move draw? And he was furious. He's like, you got to play chess. It's chess. You can't like repeat moves and draw. And Edelman's like, I didn't want to lose to the world champion. So okay, and then Fishbein also drew. He drew a worse end game. Patrick won, which we're going to look at now. And I think the other Americans lost, if I remember correctly. And Stuart Rachels was winning. If you buy Stuart Rachels' book that came out last year, which I show a lot on my stream, there's like a Mubak command. He talks in depth about his game with Kasparov. Okay, now if you remember earlier in my talk, I was telling you Patrick Wolff's style. Okay, and you guys were like, well, Ben talks a good game, but probably if Wolff plays one of the top players in the world and he has black, he'll be happy to draw. Okay, like that's the way you guys would think. Well, you're going to see from this game that it's absolutely not true. Okay, Patrick Wolff obviously played for the win right away. The game was super sharp and super complicated, and you can see that he was successful. Okay, somebody said, what's a clock simul in the chat? A regular simul can be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 boards, and you just walk around. A clock simul, for the person who's giving the simul, is a person who's basically just playing several games at once, and the people can move whenever they want to. So it's like, instead of me playing one tournament game, I'm playing 5. So it could be my move on all 5 boards because everybody moved. In a regular simul with no clock, you move when I get to your board. You wait for me. In a clock simul, you just move whenever you want. So it could be my move on all the boards. It could be their move on all the boards. You just move whenever you feel like it. And everybody gets like 2.5 hours. Well, you guys all get 2.5 hours, and I get it on each board. So I'm going to get in time trouble because I'm running around, right? So a clock simul is usually very small. It's 4 to 6 boards, and usually it's very strong. If I'm giving a clock simul, everybody's rated 1100, that's too easy because a clock simul has just a few players. If I'm giving a simul with 30, 40, 50 players, there's not going to be any IMs or GMs playing. It'll be all low-rated players because I'm playing 1 million people at once. So clock simuls are generally very strong and very small. And they're very impressive because one super grandmaster is playing 4 or 5 grandmasters or IMs at the same time. Like when Kasparov beat the German Olympic team and he beat the US juniors, these are all very strong players. I think he beat Israel too in a clock simul. Okay, so Kasparov has the white pieces. He plays the English. Wolff plays E5, which is the most aggressive. A lot of people who want to play the English and don't want to face E5, they play knight F3 first. And then if their opponent makes a move that allows it, then they play C4. That way they don't have to know the E5 lines. Okay, now, back in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, it was very common after knight C3 for black to play bishop b4. This was becoming quite a common move. And some aficionados of the English played g3 without playing knight c3, and they just want to play bishop g2 and play knight c3 later when maybe black can't play bishop b4 anymore. And the way for black to combat this in the most aggressive way is in this position to play the move c6 and try to play d5. And in fact, you could argue this is a reverse Sicilian. You could argue this is a reversed c3 Sicilian, and you'd sort of be right. So black's playing a c3 Sicilian with the white side, and white has an extra tempo because he's white. He went first. And the way to try to punish c6 is to play d4. That's what Kasparov did. And black can play either e4 or take. He took. And the reason you don't want to play d4 before black plays c6 is black plays knight c6, attacking the queen. But after c6, black can't play knight c6. So the queen just sits on d4, and it's pretty good. And with all the white pieces on d5, if black wants to play d5, which is the reason he played c6, he has to get an isolated pawn, and that's what Patrick did. Now here's what's funny about this, although you might not find it funny, but I do. Okay, we're actually going to go back to move 0 in a second. Okay, so let's look at this position right here. Okay, now back in the 1980s, Kasparov was easily the world's leading authority on the Tarrasch Queen's Gambit. Okay, which is, I mean, nobody plays it anymore, but it's fine, just nobody plays it. Okay, and that's the Queen's Gambit. Here we go. And then you play the move c5. That's the Tarrasch variation. And he played this many times against Karpov. There's a lot of games. Okay, and one of the main variations is like this. This position has occurred in thousands of Grandmaster games. Now, a move that's never played is Queen a4. That's never been played. And if I was black in this position, a move that I would never play is Bishop e7. You only play Bishop e7 because the guy makes you. Like he pins your knight, or he plays Rook c1. You know, some reason your bishop on c5 is going to get harassed. So by white playing a strange move and black playing a strange move, we basically have the Kasparov-Wolff game in a Tarrasch, except Kasparov is usually black in a Tarrasch, not white. So it's weird. Well, maybe you guys don't think it's weird, but I do. So it's a very similar position and pawn structure to the game that we see here from the English. This is the actual game, and we get almost the exact same position. Okay, so now the difference is white played Queen d4, Queen a4 in this game, Kasparov did, and Patrick Wolff didn't play Bishop c5, Bishop e7, he just played Bishop e7. So Patrick Wolff is playing Kasparov's own opening against him with an extra tempo. So for psychology, it has to be good. Okay, castles. Bishop e3, blockading the d4 pawn. The rook can go to d1 or c1. The bishop controls this diagonal. And this isn't the kind of move you would see Karpov play. This is more of a Kasparov move. Okay, because what it does is it says to his opponent, I dare you to punish me. And he's playing Patrick Wolff. If you listen to the lecture, Patrick Wolff wants to punish you. Okay. Now, of course, when I play chess, I'm trying not to lose. I'm trying to get a playable position. The engine says it's reasonable. And then I try to win in like 175 moves because my opponent falls asleep. That's what I'm doing. Okay, that's the way I play chess. Patrick Wolff wants to beat you in 5 moves. Patrick Wolff wants to beat you immediately. He wants to out-prepare you. He wants to out-calculate you. And that's the way Kasparov plays. And Kasparov's better than Wolff. But Kasparov's giving a clock simul. So, you know, even the skills. So now Wolff plays a move if you were teaching a beginner student, you would go, no, 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 don't do that. Okay? So beginners and super GMs play the same way. People in the middle just play standard. Okay, and he played knight g4. He's like, give me that bishop. Okay, and Kasparov is like, well, your knight's stupid on g4, and I'm going to blockade your d pawn. And then Wolff says, I'm a grandmaster. I like the two bishops. So he gives up control of the center. This knight on c6 was a great piece, controlling two center squares. And this bishop isn't so great since black's pawns are all on white squares. And Kasparov has this beautiful knight on d4. So strategically, it's good for white, but black has the two bishops. Okay, is that going to matter? Let's find out. Again, if I was black, I would play passive and solid and hope that maybe Kasparov blunders. That's how I beat Kasparov. He makes a one-move blunder. Maybe Kasparov plays queen here and hangs his queen. Then I would beat him. Okay, that's not how Wolff plays. Wolff plays for the throat. Okay, he plays queen b6, the most aggressive move. He wants to take on b2. Kasparov says, yeah. You can take on b2. You got d5 hanging. Okay, and I have all my pieces out. You have an isolated d pawn. Your d pawn's attacked twice, defended 0 times. Okay, so again, this is a Patrick Wolff kind of game, not a Ben Feingold kind of game, because now Wolff again plays the most aggressive move. Queen h6, threatening checkmate. Queen takes h2, checkmate. And if white plays h3 and the black knight retreats, then the bishop would be attacking the h3 pawn. And Kasparov, like Wolff, and unlike me, always calculates and plays the most aggressive, most forcing, and Kasparov calculates better than everybody, so he wins. Okay? So he doesn't say what's the safest move, like a lot of people would. Okay? He doesn't play like Carlsen or Karpov, he plays like Dubov. He's like, what's the most crazy move? And I'm going to analyze it all the way to the end. So he plays h4. Okay? And now, black's obviously going to lose his d5 pawn, and white's going to be a pawn up. So h4 just wins a pawn. And once again, Wolff plays a move that I would play like in a 1-minute game, but I would be really afraid to play it in a tournament game, especially against Kasparov. I would be scared out of my wits. And he played g5. And I told you, Wolff doesn't play for a draw, and Wolff's not afraid of everybody. Okay, this game he was hungry like the Wolff. Okay, and Kasparov's like, thanks for the pawn, attacking the bishop on e7. Wolff retreated his bishop, and he said, okay, now I'm going to go checkmate you on the king side. Now, what happened, this is hard to believe because you guys haven't experienced it, and you haven't seen it in person. Okay, I have. I've experienced it, and I've seen it in person when I was a spectator. Occasionally, players like Kasparov will analyze many moves ahead. Many. Okay? So far ahead that you wouldn't even believe it. Okay? And Kasparov did that here, but he miscalculated, probably because he's giving a clock simul. Maybe when you're giving a clock simul and you're playing 6 people at once or 5 people at once, you shouldn't calculate 15, 20 moves ahead because you might be wrong. In this position, the engine prefers white, but it wants white to play some safe moves. That's not what Kasparov does. Kasparov calculates all the way to the end and then plays the move the computer recommends, and then Kasparov beats everybody. But that's the way Wolff also plays, and Wolff calculated better than Kasparov because Wolff was just calculating this one game and Kasparov was playing several games. So instead of defending on the king side, Kasparov played rook ac1, ignoring the king side, and the reason is, after you take on h4, Kasparov, knowing that 33 years after this game, I would be streaming, I don't know how Kasparov knew that, he sacked the exchange. Always sacked the exchange. Okay, and his reasoning is, if black takes the rook, then queen d7, attacks the rook and the knight on g4 with check, and white's winning. Okay, and Patrick Wolff and Kasparov both saw this, and Wolff took on g3, threatening queen h2 checkmate. Okay, and Kasparov stopped the checkmate, and then he played knight h2 because he wants to checkmate him. And he could also play knight e5 with the same reason, and after knight e5, the computer says, I think f takes g3 is good for white. So after knight h2, black's threatening knight takes f3 check, and then queen h2 mate again. Okay, also maybe if things work out, he'll take a rook, I don't know. Okay, so Kasparov stops all that. He plays rook c1. He stops knight takes rook. He defends his rook on c8. And after knight takes, his king has the f1 square, so queen h2 isn't mate. So Kasparov saw all of this when he played rook c1 and sacked the exchange. Okay, rook takes rook, knight takes. Now here, white can take with the bishop or the pawn. Taking with the bishop is silly, because if you take with the bishop, you get checkmated on f2. So you can't do that. So you have to take with the pawn, and he did. Okay, now in this position, Kasparov is ahead a whole knight. He's a knight ahead. Okay, and black's pieces don't look very threatening. That doesn't look like black has anything. But in this particular game, Wolff saw more than Kasparov. He took on f2 with check. Now, I'm going to ask you the first question where you could unmute and then answer. If you play king takes f2, which he did not play, what would Patrick Wolff do here? Somebody can unmute and answer.
Bishop h4 check, and then rook takes c8.
You could do that, right? You could also play queen h4 check, which is funnier. Then you trade queens and then take the rook. They both win. Okay? Thank you. I assume that was Oliver, because I just always assumed it was going to be Oliver. Okay. And so he played king f1, and Kasparov's up a piece. Looks good. Okay. Now, I don't know how far Kasparov saw, but I'm pretty sure he saw till here when he played the move rook c1, like whenever that was. And he's like, I'm up a piece. What's the problem? Okay. And Patrick played queen d2, threatening queen e1 mate. And I'm guessing, I'm not sure, I'm guessing what Kasparov missed, and he ended up playing knight f6 check. But again, I'm not sure, because I didn't talk to Kasparov. But I'm guessing Kasparov thought my knight's attacked and mate's attacked, I'll just play queen e4. And I think what Kasparov missed was queen e1 anyway. Takes, 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 bishop h4 check, and finally rook takes rook. Okay, usually when the game is just calculation, nobody would ever beat Kasparov, ever, if it was just calculate variations. But he's giving a clock simul, and he's playing somebody who likes to calculate a lot of variations. So it's unfortunate for Kasparov. Kasparov played knight f6 check, and the reason he played this is pretty funny. So if you take the knight, I think the computer says, I guess queen g4 check draws. Yeah, we're not mating, and white has perpetual, and the bishop ending is a draw. So I think this is a draw. And what's funny is king h8 doesn't win, and the reason, this is why Kasparov played knight f6. Now after queen e4, if you remember that variation I showed you, you might remember it, I don't know. Here, 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 here. Bishop h4, oh, you can't jump over the knight. No. If you play bishop a5 check, I can go here. And I assume this is a draw. I'm not even sure who's better. Probably it's a draw. Okay, so Patrick Wolff didn't play king h8 or take the knight. He played king g7. Now he's attacking the knight again, and he's threatening queen e1 mate, and so forth. So, I mean, the knight's just hanging twice. So Kasparov checked, and now he played king to h8, and now that queen e1 check is back on, because we're going to have bishop. Well, actually, no, the knight is in the way, so now he can play. Now he can play queen e4, and he did, right? Okay, and once again, the knight on e8 stops rook takes rook, which was Patrick Wolff's plan. Unfortunately, white doesn't really have a threat here. White, if it's white's move, nothing. So black gets a free move, and Patrick played a brilliant move, and Kasparov had to resign. Amazing. Can anybody find the move that Patrick played here? Really nice move. Recommended by me because the game ended. I always recommend that.
Bishop h4.
Very good. Didn't even sound like Oliver that time. Bishop h4. You can't take the bishop because queen e1 is mate. If you don't take the bishop, queen e1 is mate, and queen d1 is mate. And you could do a spite check, queen e5, but then never play f6, and then there's the mate threat again. So after bishop h4, Kasparov had to resign. One of the quickest losses Kasparov's ever had against somebody who wasn't, I mean, Patrick wasn't top 10, top 20, top 30 in the world. He was one of the top 5 players in the US. He didn't play in all the super grandmaster tournaments. He played in strong American tournaments, but he was a young player. He was in 1988, he must have been like 21 years old. So he liked to calculate and play aggressive. And the fact that he was playing Kasparov didn't stop him from doing that. And I think that's the problem a lot of people have is when they play somebody, they're like, oh no. Okay, and that's obviously when you play Magnus or Kasparov or Karpov and they're the world champion, it's easy to get psyched out. And it's very difficult to psych out Patrick Wolff. Okay, that's why he's able to beat super GMs. And I guess when you go to Harvard and Yale and your brother is a law professor from Harvard and your dad went to Harvard, your mom went to Harvard, then and you're a grandmaster and you're the US champion, you're the US junior champion. He was also the national high school champion. I guess you get some confidence. That's not something that Patrick lacks, is confidence. Okay, so Patrick calculated, he believed his calculation, he did what he had to do, he calculated better than Kasparov, not a sentence you hear very often, and Kasparov had to resign. Okay, this was the only game in the clock simul that Kasparov lost. Kasparov doesn't lose very much because he sees everything, but not this game. This game he got outcalculated. And it's too bad that between like 1970 and 2000, a lot of the young, talented, best players in the US like Patrick didn't play chess anymore and got real jobs. That's unfortunate because a lot of chess talent isn't playing chess. And well, because of Rex and the St. Louis Club and the fact that we have so many good players now and people move to the US to play chess, now the US is pretty strong. So, man, now we got some good players. But yeah, before we had Fischer, then we're just waiting for somebody else. Now we got a lot of good players. And I mean, Patrick would have won more US championships and probably would have become top 50 in the world if he hadn't gone into finance where, you know, he was running billion-dollar companies. So you can decide for yourself which is more important. Obviously, it's chess. All right, thanks for watching the Patrick Wolff Great Players of the Past video. Hopefully, Stuart Rachels wasn't offended. Hopefully, if Patrick watches this, he wasn't offended. But you can be offended a little bit because, you know, that's how I roll. Please like and subscribe and so on, mainly and so on. And I'll see you guys next. Click like and subscribe here. Go watch the next videos. And stay tuned next time for more lectures from the Chess Club and Scholastic Center of Atlanta. Bye, everyone.